Massive injuries, massive scoring for the first round of the playoffs were the highlights of the first round of Fantasy Playoff Weekend. Nick and I are here to break it all down for you. Come up on the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the RotoWire Fantasy Football Podcast. Jeff Erickson here with Nick Whalen. Busy week 15, first round of the playoffs. Lots of scoring, and unfortunately, Nick, lots of injuries.
Lots of scoring, lots of injuries. What was not a great week for me fantasy-wise, Jeff. It kind of felt like to me a reversal of what we saw for much of the regular season. You know, we saw a ton of points on the board. Obviously, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, guys who have been doing it all year. Those were the big quarterback scorers on the slate yesterday. But yeah, a lot of the running backs, a lot of the receivers that have been coming through for us throughout the year just didn't necessarily do that in week 15, right? You know, someone like Jamar Chase had a pretty modest week by his standards. And, you know, all of a sudden Devontae Adams wakes up for 43 fantasy points. And Amon-Ra St. Brown, who's had a very good season, but those splashy 37.3 PPR days have been few and far between. Mike Evans, Brian Thomas, Devontae Smith, all these guys are at the top of the receiving leaderboard. And, you know, Derrick Henry and Saquon Barkley, those have been the guys at running back this season. Oh boy, not a good day. Not a good day for those of us who have staked our entire fantasy seasons on Saquon Barkley, a single-digit fantasy performance at the worst time.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, hopefully, like it's like the NFFC where you get multiple rounds, you're not eliminated. Well, but you got, and I see you got two guys still going tonight, so you got a little time, two spots at least.
Yeah, it's not looking good. It's not looking good as far as finishing in the money. I mean, it's a 3-week sprint in the NFFC when you get to the championship round. So, you know, weeks 15, 16, and 17 total points added to your average from the regular season, which is nice. But it's tough to, you know, I got 50 out of Lamar, 50 points out of Lamar Jackson, and just nothing notable from anyone else. And I still do have Jacoby Myers going tonight along with Bijan Robinson. So we'll see. But, you know, it's a team that is lacking at receiver. You know, I feel like I have a bunch of guys who I felt good about going in, and now they kind of feel marginalized in their own offense. You know, someone like DK Metcalf, someone like Jaden Reed, T. Higgins ended up being fine yesterday, but you don't feel like there's that, you know, 35, 40 point ceiling with someone like T. Higgins, even in this Bengals offense, right? I mean, it's been so Jamar Chase heavy for them. So, you know, might have to kiss my dream of winning the 250K goodbye, because this is not a good start to that championship round.
Yeah. So yeah, and that's just the thing though. And you know, just you need a big game out of Bijan tonight to kind of get you in that 170 range, and that, you know, that then because I know there's some people putting up 250 burgers this week. I get it. But huge injuries. Let's start off right at the top. Patrick Mahomes hurt that ankle late. Yeah. I saw the play. He got bent in a way that, you know, ankles shouldn't get bent. And you know, he didn't play the last series. They said, well, it's because they're up 2 scores. Come on. Mahomes doesn't sit out 2-score leads. You know, this is not something that happens. Going to be, and the thing is, they're in a stretch of 3 games in 11 days. They are one of the teams that play on Christmas. They play on Saturday. This is bad.
Yeah. I mean, it's relatively bad considering where the Chiefs sit right now atop the AFC. I mean, the 1 seed is certainly in play now for a team like Buffalo. If Kansas City were to falter, obviously the Bills, you know, they have 3 losses, but they do have the tiebreak over Kansas City. So I think that would be your primary concern. Obviously, number 1 is just making sure Patrick Mahomes is healthy for the postseason. And I certainly don't think he's going to play on Saturday against Houston. You know, that line opened up at Texans -1.5. It was up to 2, then 2.5, then back down to 2. It is now Texans -3 at Kansas City. So that's a pretty strong indication that, you know, the initial thought is that Mahomes won't be out there. You know, I don't know if we want to start with this Chiefs game and just dive in. I mean,
sure. Let's
Kansas City won by double digits. They took care of business. I thought this was maybe the worst game of the year for the Chiefs. It was certainly their worst offensive game of the season. 4.1 yards per play. 4.1. Patrick Mahomes was 19 of 38 for 159 yards. And, you know, on the Browns side of things, this felt a lot like the Steelers game last week, where, you know, they actually played pretty evenly. Obviously, you turn it over 6 times. You're not going to win many games, but still to only lose that game by 2 scores, I think just speaks to the level that Kansas City was playing. Like, this was like a C- game for the Chiefs all around. The Browns never even reached the red zone on the entire day. But you look at the second half specifically for Kansas City, and I saw a lot of complaining from Chiefs fans on Twitter about the play calling and how that was all handled. I mean, Kansas City had chance after chance after chance to run away with this game and really, really put it away. And with the way Cleveland was playing, you never really felt like they were threatening to win the game. But the Browns come out, they throw an interception on the first play of the second half. Chiefs immediately turn that into an easy touchdown. On the second play from scrimmage for the Cleveland Browns, they fumble and hand the ball back to Kansas City. At this point, it's a 21-0 game. The Chiefs then go punt, 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 out on downs, punt to end this game. I mean,
desultory, just desultory performance there.
Right. Horrible. It was not a convincing victory by any means. Like I don't feel, any differently or any better about Kansas City coming out of this win. It wasn't like this, we grounded out a win. Like it was like, oh man, this is an alarming performance to me.
Yeah. On the offensive side of the ball, the defensive side really stepped up. Although some of this was in Browns induced. Like Jameis threw a pick in the end zone that was way underthrown, goodness. Just horrible throw. It's just like, oh, you can't do that. Jameis, this was like, there's peak Jameis and then there's floor Jameis, and this was a floor Jameis performance. Got benched for the fourth quarter. Yeah. We'll see what their status is coming up against the Bengals this week, whether it's him or DTR. But the Browns they're out of the playoffs. I mean, they're not committed to Winston beyond this year. Maybe they should think about it, but this is why you don't commit to it now.
I think there's a decent chance it is DTR, who of course came on in relief of Jameis Winston. And this was not injury related. This was not game flow related. It was Jameis, you're benched after the third interception. And of course, DTR came in and threw one himself to contribute to those 6 turnovers. But Kevin Stefanski did say this morning that they have not made a decision quite yet on who will be out there against Cincinnati this week. But my guess is they've maybe had it temporarily, at least with the Jameis experience, which if it is DTR, I mean, does it really affect the bottom line for the Browns at this point? Probably not. But I think it might affect Jerry Jeudy, who continued to be peppered with targets yet again. Yep. No David Njoku yesterday for the Browns. Jerry Jeudy, 14 targets on the day, caught 11 of those for 108 yards, did not find the end zone, but still, I mean, he's going to finish the year in all likelihood as a top 10 fantasy receiver. He has an outside shot to hit 1,500 yards on the year. I mean, over the last 7 weeks, Jeff, he is number 2 in PPR scoring on a per game basis. I mean, he's just been incredible.
Just a wild transition. It kind of makes you want to go through like an alternate career path, like simulation here. Like, what happens if Jerry Jeudy comes up on a team that is better at throwing the football, where he is the main guy? Like, Denver has gone through some shaky quarterbacks over his years, including Russell Wilson, who just didn't jibe with Sean Payton. Jameis Winston has unlocked Jerry Jeudy. Think about that. It's just, it's interesting to think about that, because clearly Deshaun Watson wasn't getting it done with them. And also, I mean, there's always been another. There was Amari Cooper earlier in the season. There was, Cortland Sutton in Denver, where, he kind of won the battle of which is the alpha, I suppose. But well, this is if I have Jeudy in a dynasty league, I've held on to him this whole time. And because it's a dynasty league, I'm not going to find something better out there. So I'll just kind of keep him and hope. I was like using him in bye weeks and that's it. And now he's a mainstay for now.
Right. And he signed that extension with the Browns, and everybody was kind of like, all right, if you want to do that, that's fine. He hasn't really shown all that much, but it looks like kind of a shrewd move now. And obviously if you follow Jerry Jeudy at the college level, it's like, this shouldn't be that surprising. Like, he was one of the most productive college receivers of the last decade, and certainly got off to a disappointing start in Denver, but it's not like this is totally coming out of nowhere. I think, there was always this debate of, is he just a bust? Is he not the guy we thought he was? Or is he being misused? Is he kind of a problem child? And, all this is looking pretty good for Jerry Jeudy's argument that he was misused with the Denver Broncos, because like you said, it's not like he's playing with Patrick Mahomes or Josh Allen. I mean, it's all it's taken is just like semi-competent quarterback play from Jameis Winston to fully unlock him. A couple other notes that I have from this game. Obviously, there was not a whole lot from a fantasy perspective. Xavier Worthy ended up leading all Kansas City wide receivers in snaps by a wide margin in this game. Worth noting, though, that Hollywood Brown, his practice window is open, could be back as soon as this week against Houston. On the injury front, Nick Chubb ended up leaving with a broken foot. So he'll obviously be done for the year. I mean, not the way he was playing, it doesn't have huge fantasy ramifications, but slight boost for Jerome Ford the rest of the way. And then interesting note that I saw after the game, you mentioned the Jameis pick in the end zone. Trent McDuffie was the defender for KC who made that pick. And you could see it if you watch the replay. He said post-game that he was watching the play on the Jumbotron, rather than turning around. So he's running kind of, facing the receiver, saw Jameis throw the ball, and then you could see on the replay, he turns around at the exact moment because he's tracking the ball on the Jumbotron. So that's a unique way for Jameis Winston to throw his third pick of the day, is that somebody's watching the Jumbotron and tracking him.
Right. DTR was not any better, 4 for 9 for 18 yards and threw
He's
a
bad.
pick of his own. There's no joy there. No. That happens. Elijah Moore, 2 catches for -1 yards. He was the target in another one of the end zone interceptions.
Yeah.
And it wasn't his fault necessarily, but he also didn't make a play. But there was no joy anywhere else in this game. Jerome Ford had 1 lightning strike, and that's it. Otherwise, Cleveland shut out for the day. Kareem Hunt actually outrushed Pacheco. Ugh. Yep. Yeah, it was ugly. Travis Kelce looked like he was a half step slow every time he caught the ball. It looked like he was kind of running in water. It was tough to watch. Let's move on. Let's go to a more fun game. Let's talk about the game of the day. It has to be Buffalo Bills romping all over the Lions, 48-42, but it wasn't necessarily that close. Although credit to the Lions for keep on grinding offensively. Light a candle for anybody that's going up against Goff and Amon-Ra St. Brown, because that was just crazy. But what a command performance by Josh Allen again, back-to-back weeks where he's just crushing fools in fantasy. I mean, it's if you're up, especially in the NFFC where you get 6 points for the passing touchdown as well, you're just so screwed if you're up against Allen.
Yeah, no question about that. I don't have a whole lot of Josh Allen this year, who, by the way, now is -900 to win the MVP. He was around -400, -500 coming into the week. So he, extended significantly his MVP lead despite Lamar Jackson playing a near perfect game against the Giants with 5 touchdowns. So, looks like this is Josh Allen's award firmly to lose over these last 3 weeks. And the Bills are also now Super Bowl favorites at the DK Sportsbook. They are +425, slight favorites over the Eagles and the Lions, who dropped to +450. Yeah, just an incredible game. I mean, this is now 7 straight games, I believe, that Buffalo scored at least 30. Just unlimited offensive potential, it felt like, for this team. And, much like the Rams game last week, I mean, extremely similar script, although, Buffalo was the team last week, of course, that was trying to go score for score and was kind of chasing the Rams the entire game. I thought it was really important. One of the first times this year that we've seen Detroit get punched in the mouth early. It's like this was a 14-0 game midway through the first quarter. So, the Lions basically got knocked out of their game script, which what do they want to do? They want to bludgeon you on the ground. They want to use that to open up the passing game. They only ran the ball 15 times total on the day. And part of that, which we just learned like an hour ago, is that David Montgomery has an MCL injury that he basically played through for much of the game. His snap count was way down. I was wondering why he wasn't out there a little bit more. But you're thinking, okay, they're trailing throughout the game. Jahmyr Gibbs is the better pass catcher. Maybe they're just not using Montgomery, who only had 5 carries for 4 yards. But it turns out it's an MCL injury for him, just adding to this crazy list of injuries for Detroit. They lost 2 more starting defenders. There's a third who's on the injury report as well. Carlton Davis, one of their best defensive backs, broke his jaw. Lee McNeil, one of their interior defenders. Both of those guys could be season-ending injuries, according to Dan Campbell. And we're starting to see the ramifications now of these injuries for the Lions defense. Aaron Schatz had a good note that the Lions were 3rd in defensive DVOA for the first 11 weeks of the season. Since week 12, they have fallen to 25th.
Yeah, totally believable. And you can see it. I mean, just look at the depth chart. There's like 19 guys that are out right
outrageous.
Now. Yeah. And their defensive line and their linebacking core is eviscerated. The Davis one's huge too, because their secondary was the one thing that was intact. And now that's not the case either. It's brutal. Montgomery actually had a couple of key pass catches, but I noticed early the Bills stopped the Lions on their initial drive, stopped them from running the ball, got them in a long down and distance. They got to Goff a few times. That the Lions never give up sacks like that, and they were getting to Goff. I mean, they did so many things right on this game here. And they got that. They got to 21-7, and it was just this back and forth trying to catch up the whole time after that there, which is why Campbell, obviously, why he ordered up the crazy onside kick with 12 minutes left, because he knew they couldn't get a stop. They couldn't.
I didn't love that decision.
I didn't either,
I didn't love
but
it.
I understand why. Yeah.
It's different now with the dynamic kickoff, because you can't you can't pull a surprise onside kick.
Right.
You know, I think I could see that in the past where, you know, Buffalo's not lined up for it. They're not expecting it. Maybe you could catch them off guard. But when you have to declare that you're doing the onside kick with 12 minutes left, like Buffalo's going to prepare for it. They're going to be ready. And not only did they jump on it, but they returned it, you know, all the way to the 5-yard line and just get an instant touchdown. Like that totally backfired. I get that you weren't stopping them at all. You feel like you need some sort of juice to, you know, to get your team back in it. Like I understand the logic. I thought that was kind of a wildly desperate, you know, play to make with that much time on the clock. You know, it's one thing if you want to do that, let's say you're down 10 with like 5 minutes left. Sure, go for it. But with 12 minutes left, I mean, you could get a fluky turnover. You know, at some point, you know, it felt like, you know, maybe the Bills would make a mistake. They never really did. They only punted once in this game. But I thought it was a little overly aggressive. Did it change the result of the game? Probably not. But you know, to basically hand them a score on the return, I thought was a pretty brutal error. Buffalo, by the way, finished at 8.2 yards per play. That felt low to me watching this game. Like 8.2, that's fantastic. It felt like they were at like 15. Second game in a row that they've put up at least 8 yards per play. They're the only team in the league that has 2 games with at least 8 yards per play on the year. They had the third most total yards in a game this season. Detroit, of course, has the current record for that win against Jacksonville. But overall, I mean, I don't really feel any worse about Detroit necessarily. It's like this is an acceptable loss, but the injuries are mounting to the point where it's starting to feel like, man, this might be a what if type of year, because I think Detroit's the best team in the NFC, best roster. But when you take away half of those key playmakers, I mean, it's just not many teams can survive. The biggest question though is like, which team is going to take advantage of this? Like certainly Philly can. Philly. You know, could Green Bay, could Minnesota? It's like, you know, are there other teams that are positioned well enough to take advantage of this before we're talking NFC Championship game or Super Bowl?
You know, hot take. You know, the division's not done. You know, they don't. The Lions aren't even clinched in the division, let alone the conference. I mean, they're a half game ahead of the Vikings, who play tonight. I think we see the Vikings as kind of a surprise, flawed team, but Kevin O'Connell coaches the heck out of them. Brian Flores is coaching the heck out of the defense. They've got one of the best defenses in the NFC, if not football. You know, and they play each other later on this season in Detroit, so they can get that head-to-head back. Yep. I mean, they're tied if they win tonight against the Bears. So, yeah, and I think the Vikings and the Eagles both. I mean, hell, I mean, I think the Bucs have beaten the Lions once before. They gave the Lions a scare in the playoffs last year. We'll talk about the Bucs, but you know they're a real boy. They're legit. So they could be part of that picture too. I think the Lions are at risk of even losing in the first, you know, their first playoff game. You know, with no defense, they have no defense at all right now. They're the Bengals.
It's true. That's true. And you know, all those teams that you mentioned in the NFC, I mean, yeah, I think you still probably think of Minnesota as this team that, you know, wins with defense first and foremost, you know, Brian Flores and all that, but it's still a great offense, right? It's a great offense with the best receiver in football still, in my mind, in Justin Jefferson. Like there's no like grinded out team that you'd be okay facing it. So I mean, Tampa Bay just put 40 on a really good Chargers team this past week. So I think some of these could be viewed as bad matchups with all the injuries on this defense. Other fantasy notes from this game, of which there were many. I know. Amari Cooper takes a 0 somehow. The Bills put up 48 points. They put up well over 500 yards of offense. And
not even Cooper a target.
Not involved. Not even a single target. That's brutal.
Happen?
Yeah, I mean, Ty Johnson ended up being the Bills' leading receiver by a lot. Yeah, he had 50 more receiving yards than any other player. Had 3 long catches early in the game. I think by the end of, or by midway through the second quarter, he was like up over 100 yards receiving already. The Bills, you know, just kept ripping off long drives. I mean, it's not like Detroit was committing these Browns type of errors. You know, there was the Amon-Ra St. Brown fumble, but other than that, I mean, Jared Goff threw for 494 yards, 5 touchdowns, no picks. So the Bills were putting together long, sustained drives. I mean, their first touchdowns, first 3 drives, they come out and score a touchdown on all 3, 73, 78, and 70 yards, 9.4 yards per play on those first 3 drives. And like you alluded to, you just knew right away. I mean, the Bills had it. Like they came prepared. And, you know, this is at the end of a really tough 4-game stretch. So that's kind of what prevented me from making this one of my official plays in staff picks. But, you know, obviously you can see the Lions showing up here at home, but the Bills come off of playing the Chiefs, the Niners, and the Rams, and then top it off with this performance.
Yeah, really 3 out of 4. Not bad. And if you would have told me they're going to lose one game, it would not have been the Rams game, the one I would have picked.
Right.
That's for sure. They rediscovered James Cook. Very nice day for him. 14-105, a couple of long ones in there. And the Ty Johnson thing's hilarious too. The the Lions, Sam Laporta got a lot of run, got 10 targets in that one himself. That's a positive development. I mean, they're just going to have to, get in these shootouts every single week. It feels like and at least they are capable of doing that even without Montgomery. Right. I mean, I think that they still have enough skill around the rest of the way there. They can make that happen. Concurrent to this game, the Eagles bludgeoned the Steelers in the second half of this one. Just the Steelers, my favorite line from this game, the Steelers had two possessions in the second half. Two. I mean, it's crazy. They chose to punt 4th and 6 down 2 touchdowns, and they never got the ball back. And, granted, I don't know if you could necessarily foresee that you weren't going to get the ball back, but at the same time, they weren't that decision to punt was kind of, it's easy to second guess that one.
There was certainly some cowardice there. I mean, I get it because it was 4th and 7. And, if it's like 4th and 2, I think that becomes a significantly more egregious decision. And with 10 minutes and 40 seconds on the clock, you probably think you're getting the ball back at some point. Maybe it's too late to erase a 2-score deficit, but you probably don't think you're just never seeing the ball again in that scenario. I mean, this was a clock chewing masterpiece by the Philadelphia Eagles in the second half. They put together a 13-play, 7+ minute field goal drive to make it a 20-13 game. The Steelers fumble on their first possession of the second half. That was I think it was the Najee Harris fumble, right? Where
on the toss. No, it was Harris. Yep.
Yeah, for whatever reason, it's officially charged to Russell Wilson. But I mean, there was a perfect toss that Najee Harris just took his eyes off of and completely dropped. So the Eagles get the ball back. They put together a 13-play, 7-minute drive to go up 14. Like you said, the Steelers punt on their ensuing drive, and then it's a 21-play, 88-yard, 10.5-minute drive to end it, which basically concludes with, Jalen Hurts kneeling it out deep in Pittsburgh territory. So the Eagles could have tacked on another score if they wanted, but this was a masterclass, I thought, by the Eagles, just kind of taking advantage of a Steelers offense that we knew would be limited in terms of downfield attacking without George Pickens. Yeah. But I think this was maybe even worse than we expected. I mean, 163 total yards for the Steelers on the day. That was their fewest in any game since 2010, when they had 127 yards in a win somehow over the Tennessee Titans. I looked up the box score from that game, Jeff. That was a game in which both Charlie Batch and Dennis Dixon co-quarterbacked the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, I thought I saw you had bloody eyes from watching that game, that box score there, looking at that box score, just brutal there. There's some names, by the way, there too. It really is. You take off that top threat there, and then, you can't throw a moon ball. You can't do anything else. Calvin Austin was the only guy that had any sort of fancy day at all at 5 for 65. Harris couldn't get going. He had one run for 7 yards. Otherwise, it was just ugly. And you're just not running that many plays, period. Their best play was a punt that they recovered the fumble from and turned around and scored after that. But
that's the thing. I mean, and the Eagles gifted them a fumble early in the game too. And you just never felt like the Steelers were in this game. It was 17-13 at the half, and it still felt like, the Eagles are going to be just fine here. I really don't see the Steelers climbing back into this. I mean, it was 148-2 in terms of total yards after the first quarter. The Steelers just can't do anything without George Pickens, and we'll see if he's back next week. TJ Watt got banged up late in this game. Seems like he's dodged a major injury. It looked really bad at first. Could still cost him a week or two, but it's not going to be something super long term. AJ Brown also looks like he's dodged a serious injury. He got hurt on a hip drop. And then, of course, Saquon Barkley, he went to the medical tent. He was cleared to return. There were a couple possessions in a row where he wasn't out there. They started sprinkling him back in, but we still saw a lot of Kenneth Gainwell in the second half. Obviously ended up being a brutal fantasy day for Saquon, and he was kind of cryptic after the game. He said he tweaked something. He didn't want to give any details. I don't think he's going to miss time, but certainly something to monitor over the next few days.
Yeah. One silver lining, Steelers did clinch a playoff spot.
They did.
Yeah. So, I mean, that in a way, they're going through this brutal schedule stretch, but they can work on getting healthy. That is one thing that they can do. They get the Ravens on Saturday. They get the Chiefs on Christmas Day. That's a tough. They're in the mid. I mean, this is, you want to talk. We all knew this stretch was coming with the schedule for the Steelers, but we're in it now. Eagles, Ravens, Chiefs, Bengals in week 18. Who knows if the Bengals will have something to play for or not? But point is, they're they're in it right now. And so they really need to kind of figure out, get healthy and try to figure out everything there, because they're clearly a different team without Pickens, and that's the one thing that you can a big takeaway from that. All right, let's move on. Let's do one more game before we do our first break. Let's talk a little Broncos-Colts, the other game in that late window that was massive.
Yeah, as I've explicated a few times now, it was not a great fantasy week for me, but we did pretty well on the betting side, and this is one of a few games that really turned my way in the second half. At no point did I think the Broncos were going to cover 4.5 in this game. Once Jonathan Taylor seemingly ran in for a touchdown to make it a multi-score game, you just felt like, all right, finally, some of these games are catching up to Denver. I don't think on balance they played all that well offensively, especially over the last month. And, they found a way to come back and beat the Raiders. They found a way to survive that Browns game. And you're thinking, okay, maybe all this is finally catching up to them. I thought Bo Nix was like abjectly bad for most of this game. Threw 3 picks, a lot of low throws, throwing short of the sticks on third down, just a lot of the plays that it felt like it had been phased out of his game over the last couple of months. I mean, this was like week 2, Bo Nix back in the mix. Like, he was just so bad. Yeah. And yet the Colts handed this game, just handed it right to the Denver Broncos. Obviously, it started with the Jonathan Taylor play. That was the clear inflection point. At the end of the game, you saw Jonathan Taylor going up and down the sideline, talking to everybody and essentially apologizing and saying, hey, this one's on me.
Sorry, I cost us a playoff spot. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if they were going to make the playoffs, but it at least cost you the chance to try to play for that over the last 3 weeks.
Well, you saw those things beforehand talking. Sorry to interrupt. You saw all like this is what happens if the Colts win. This is what happens with the Broncos wins, and how it massively changes the playoff odds.
Oh, yeah. Big time. Right. And, I think a lot of things just kind of broke against the Colts. Obviously, them losing being number 1 and just, handing Denver more of an advantage there. But you did get a loss from the Chargers. It would have been big for Houston to potentially lose to Miami. But yeah, either way, now the Colts can't feel great about this. I think it brings up just a lot of questions in general about this team. But I thought the Denver defense, was a liability early in this game as well. Gave up 2 early scores to the Colts. They mentioned this on the broadcast that on the first 2 drives of the game for Indy, the Denver defense gave up 3 conversions on 3rd and 9 or longer, which is just not something that you've seen much this season from the Broncos. Anthony Richardson, it was again one of those games where it's like the stat line doesn't look great. I actually thought he was solid on balance. I mean, escaped some incredible sacks. Like, he was almost brought down for a safety twice, was able to get out of the end zone, was able to shake through some tackles. The decision making not always going to be great. He turned it over as well. And then of course we talk about this every week, Jeff. I don't know why these teams try these trick plays. They're not working this year. This might have been the worst of them all. A.D. Mitchell essentially throwing an interception, which I think was officially charged as a fumble because it was a lateral to Nick Bonito, who had his second defensive touchdown of the year. And that really broke it open. That made it 24-13 in favor of the Broncos and finally gave them a cushion.
Yeah. The play was moving so slowly on that one there. Like the initial throw almost got tipped. The initial lateral to Mitchell in the first place almost got tipped. And you're like, oh no. And I'm actually, frankly, I'm surprised this doesn't happen more often. You throw these across field throws from a non-quarterback where there's less zip on the ball. It's like, and the discretion whether to throw or not is not always there. Let's face it, if you're a receiver and you get a chance to throw the ball, you're chucking that ball. You're not going to read the play. And that's what happened here. It was such a huge changing play too. I mean, you want to talk about just one game destroyed by 2 plays. That was it. Yeah. It was the Taylor non-touchdown. And then, the A.D. Mitchell pick 6, fumble 6, lateral 6, whatever you want to call it there. Those 2 plays alone. I mean, they ended up turning it over 5 times. Early on in this game, they could do no wrong. And late in the game, they could do no right. That fourth quarter was just utterly disastrous. Actually, the entire second half. I mean, they got outscored 24-0 in the second half of this game. And Denver did nothing offensively. Nothing.
Well, Denver didn't even take the lead until the fourth quarter. That's kind of the crazy part. Is like there were all these mistakes throughout the day. I mean, Anthony Richardson threw a pick in the first half, and what does Denver do with that opportunity? They immediately go 3 and out and punt, and then they go 3 and out and punt on their next possession. So you're kind of waiting for Denver to take advantage. They come out, they turned it over. The Broncos did on their first possession after the half. What do the Colts do? They turn it right back. That was the Jonathan Taylor play that would have made it a 20-7 game. But again, right after that, we could talk about the Jonathan Taylor play being the inflection point. The Broncos didn't score after that. They punted on their next drive. They went 3 and out again. And then they threw a pick on their next drive. Like it wasn't until the fourth quarter when they actually did anything offensively. So it took, 4 or 5 mistakes for the Colts to finally do themselves in. And, it was funny after the game, AD Mitchell was asked about that play. He's like, they told me if it's not open to not throw it back, just throw the ball away. It's like, I thought it was open, but then Nick Bonito turned into Ed Reed. That was his exact wording. So we got an Ed Reed comp for Bonito.
Nice.
But yeah, it wasn't until that play that the Broncos really got anything going. So it just really, really weird game. The Broncos continue to put up points every single week. I mean, they've put up 31, 41, 29, 38 over their last 4 games. And yet, other than the Falcons game, which was maybe their most convincing win of the season, like none of these last 3 have been like, oh man, watch out for the Broncos. I feel like they're starting to show some cracks defensively. Yeah, like they had no business winning this game. They probably should have lost to the Browns before the bye. They were trailing the Raiders, into the third quarter a few weeks ago.
That's right.
So they'll be a playoff team, but I still have some questions. And they play at the Chargers, at the Bengals, and then they get the Chiefs in Week 18. So it should be a fun finish.
Yeah, we'll see if the Chiefs care in that one there. As a Bengals fan, I'm hoping the Chiefs care because this is an interesting stretch here for them. Yeah, the Broncos sub 200 yards scored 31 points. You go figure. It's because the Colts turned it over 5 times.
First team this season to put up under 200 yards and win by double digits. 3.2 yards per play. Ugh.
Horrible offense there. And of course, nothing happened on the running game. McLaughlin 21 yards, Williams 15, Estime 13. Hey, Estime got 5 carries. I don't hear this enough. Like this Broncos offensive line must not be that great at run blocking. I mean, it's we always kind of blame the backs, but none of the backs are getting it done.
No, and this is not a new issue by any means for Denver. I mean, they've had a couple spots this season where it looks like they're getting the running game going, but on balance, I mean, they're 28th in rushing EPA on the year, which is very, very bad. They're 26th in yards per attempt. They're putting up over 100 yards per game, which is about league average, but they're needing a ton of carries to get there. They're in the top half of the league in terms of attempts. So it has not been an efficient running game by any means. And this would have been a day where they could have used that, right? Like when Bo Nix is struggling, you'd like to be able to lean on that ground game. And ultimately, that's probably something that's going to limit their ceiling. There are a number of factors here, but it's been a very fun year. It's been a fun team. It's fun to see Bo Nix progress like this. I don't know that I have the Broncos on my short list of teams to pull a playoff upset.
No, I don't either. We're going to talk about their division mate and a competitor for a wild card spot, the Chargers, and how they lost to the Bucs. But first, quick note from DraftKings Pick 6.
We're proud to be brought to you by DraftKings Pick 6. So many NFL offerings each week over at Pick 6. Been enjoying playing on the Pick 6 platform each and every week of the NFL season. Think a certain quarterback will throw for more than 300 yards. How about your favorite receiver scoring a touchdown? Check out Pick 6, the newest way to play fantasy football and win cash right now with DraftKings. Here's how it works. Just pick 2 to 6 players of the same sport and choose if they'll have more or less of a given stat. Yards, catches, touchdowns, etc. Lock in those picks and compete against opponents for a shot at huge cash prizes. Download the new DraftKings Pick 6 app now and use our code ROTOPICK. That's ROTOPICK. Again, ROTOPICK, ROTOPICK. If you're a new Pick 6 customer, play $5, get $50 in Pick 6 credits guaranteed. Just use that code, ROTOPICK. Gambling problem? Call 1-800-GAMBLER. Help is available for problem gambling. Call 888-788-997777 or visit ccpg.org in Connecticut. Must be 18 plus. Age and eligibility restrictions vary by jurisdiction. Pick 6 not available everywhere, including New York and Ontario. Void where prohibited. See terms at pick6.draftkings.com/promos.
The Los Angeles Chargers were ahead of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers at halftime, 17-13. They lost 17-40. What a just audacious second half for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
This was the biggest surprise of the weekend for me. Not necessarily that Tampa won the game, but the way that they won it. I mean, 27-0 in the second half. I think you could talk about some of the injuries on the LA side of things, but Tampa Bay was banged up coming into this game as well. I actually kept Bucky Irving out of some of my lineups because I worried about the re-injury. Is he going to be 100%? He of course looked great. Over basically half his yardage came on one run in the second half, but the snap share was back up to where it should be, 15 for 117 on the ground. Did only have 2 catches though for -4 yards, so it wasn't a massive fantasy day for him. But the Tampa Bay offense, man, came alive. And this was another game where, the Buccaneers scored on their first drive. And you're like, okay, good start. But then they let up a touchdown to the Chargers. Chargers, like you said, led this game 17-10. They go ahead 17-10 midway through the second, and then the Bucs instantly fumble on their next possession. And watching this game, I'm thinking, okay, it's going to get away from Tampa Bay here real quickly. And the Chargers just turtled up. I mean, just couldn't do anything offensively in the second half. Meanwhile, the Buccaneers, they finished the game field goal, touchdown, field goal, touchdown, 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 field goal. And that's 6 straight scoring possessions on a really good Chargers defense on the road. So came away really impressed with the Buccaneers. This was not a game that I necessarily expected them to win. I completely stayed away, in all betting interest. I just thought it was a total toss-up. In no world did I see Tampa Bay winning this game by 3 scores. Ended up being a great day for Jalen McMillan, who had an early touchdown. Mike Evans had 2 scores. I was looking this up actually earlier today because Devontae Adams had his 100th career touchdown reception. Mike Evans is the only active player ahead of him. I believe he's up to 103 now career with his 2 yesterday. But I didn't really have a whole lot else on this game fantasy-wise. There wasn't much there for the Chargers. The Bucs, like I said, trailed into the third quarter and ended up putting up 300 more total yards. 300 more total yards than the Chargers on the day. And saw a good note on Twitter last night that the Chargers have now failed to score an offensive touchdown in the third quarter in 11 of 14 games this year. Kind of a niche stat, but speaks to some of the troubles that this team has making adjustments coming out of the half.
Yeah. And I just think they just don't have any playmakers. This is what I look at there. They couldn't run the ball again yesterday. Gus Edwards, 8 for 23.
Barely even tried.
3 for 9. McConkey is playing hurt. He went 5 for 58. Quentin Johnson made a nice play earlier to score. He got banged up in this game as well. They don't have anything that can, break anything up. I think people want to try to make DJ Chark happen. It's not happening. There's just nothing there. And I think this is personnel kind of catching up to the Chargers. I think Harbaugh's done a great job with this team. They're still in a good spot to make a playoff spot. They have tiebreakers over the teams chasing them. And that's one of the things that works in their favor. Like they have the direct win over Cincinnati, for instance. They're 2 games up on them, but they play the Broncos next week. Big game for the Chargers there. That could start to make things a little bit dicey for them if they lose to the Broncos. All along I was kind of rooting for, I'm looking through a Bengals prism, obviously, and, trying to okay, how's this 5% coming in? Well, it requires this because now am I seeing the Chargers lose? Okay, maybe the Chargers are the weak spot, but Broncos, but then Patriots, Raiders to finish the season. They can win those games.
They'll be favored in all 3. They're currently 3-point favorites. They play Thursday, so quick turnaround for the Chargers, who are at home against Denver. They're 3-point favorites on Thursday night, and again, they'll be favored over the Pats and the Raiders as well. So still got to feel pretty good if you're the Chargers, but you're totally right about the lack of weapons. I was texting some friends during the game. And it's I want to see Justin Herbert with a real wide receiver to go, because I think you found an amazing 1A in LIV McConkey.
Yep.
But you need the other guy next to him. It can't be Stone Smart. It can't be Quentin Johnston. It can't be DJ Chark. I really like Josh Palmer coming into the year. I thought the opportunity would be there. He's just not getting it done. I mean, 2 catches on 3 targets for him. Obviously, it wasn't a great day overall for anybody in this offense. But if T. Higgins does not reunite with Trevor Lawrence in Jacksonville, I want him with Justin Herbert in LA.
They're going to bring him back. Burrow said we're going to find a way. So it's going to happen there. But no,
all right.
I don't know. If it was, Burrow might even offer to rework his contracts and the Bengals might say no. They very well might not want to commit to that. And I think if they wanted it to happen, it would have happened by now. Yeah. The other big game to me, and this is the one that surprised me, was not necessarily that they won, but the extent and how they did it. The Packers just smashed the Seahawks on Sunday Night Football.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I was shocked by this one. For whatever reason, I just had a good feeling about Green Bay, and I'm not necessarily a Packers fan, but I'm here in Wisconsin, and I consume a lot of Packers talk, sometimes against my will in various group chats. But I was feeling good about this game. Partially, it wasn't even because of Green Bay necessarily. It was because I think Seattle was a little bit overvalued coming out of that win over Arizona. I think that was not necessarily emblematic of the team that Seattle's been offensively over the last 5 or 6 games. They had won, I think, 3 or 4 in a row coming into last night. But the offense did not look great. They've been sub 300 yards in a lot of those games. I didn't think the defense had really been tested all that much. And boy, were they tested, especially in the first half, by this Packers offense. I mean, it was a Josh Jacobs heavy opening to this game. I mean, Packers go on a 10-play opening touchdown drive. Josh Jacobs touched the ball on the first 8 plays in 9 of 10 plays overall, and just bludgeoned the Seattle defense. I will say, though, credit to the Seahawks for slowing down Josh Jacobs in the second half. I mean, he got almost nothing after halftime. He lost a fumble that briefly felt like this made it a game, but Sam Howell was in at that point. And, Packers obviously jump out to a big lead, not only getting the stop before halftime. They pick off Geno Smith in the end zone, which he does every other week. He throws a pick in the end zone, but to then drive down and add a field goal. It could have been a touchdown, but I thought Matt LaFleur made the right call with 4 seconds on the clock, kicked the field goal. That was a huge swing where Seattle's at least getting a field goal. And not only do you take that off the board, but you tack on 3 more points. It was a great game, I thought, for Jordan Love, especially early on. Started 9 of 9, ended up missing Romeo Doubs in the end zone for his first incompletion. Packers stalled out a few times in a row in the second half. Like I said, briefly, it felt like Seattle had an opportunity, but ended up being another really nice night for Love. Over the last 5 weeks, Jordan Love ranks 2nd in passer rating, 1st in yards per attempt. He's got a 69% completion rate, 2nd in success rate, 2nd in EPA per play, 3rd in completion percentage over expected. So it doesn't necessarily feel like he's been at a Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson level, because he hasn't, but he's been that next step below.
Yeah, absolutely. He really has. And, I still think Geno Smith's a good quarterback. I just think this offensive line is just putting him in a lot of bad spots.
It was bad.
Yeah, we thought maybe they had figured something out, that win over Arizona, the way how well that Seattle team played. Nope. They were back to being, this was more like the Jets game in terms of offensive line performance.
Right.
Where it just, poor Sam Howell, it just shows how good Geno is, that he only got sacked 3 times despite being under this barrage. Sam Howell is one of the most eminently sackable quarterbacks. If you remember when he was with the Commanders, how often he would get sacked.
Oh yeah.
4 sacks in his little brief tenure there this last night, and a pick. Just tough look there. Charbonnet had the one big run, but when you start off bam 14 nothing, it changes the game script a lot there too. And so Charbonnet barely got that many chances, which is a shame because he still looks good. He still had that really nice run. DK Metcalf 3 targets. It's clearly a JSN's world now. And you are Mr. JSN though. You are validated here.
Well, I didn't get him on enough teams. Like I have them plenty, but they're not in the leagues that matter.
Okay.
What? I don't have him in the NFFC. I have DK there, which is just, oh my goodness. Like he's a secondary option. He is. I mean, the volume is it's never there. The volume is never there. JSN still had himself a solid night in PPR, gave you 18.3 points. You'll live with that. And like you said with Charbonnet, like I had an agonizing decision, where I was like, I have Garendo and Charbonnet, and I ended up sitting Garendo on Thursday, which was okay, with the idea that Charbonnet would be the starter. Of course, we didn't know that at the time because Kenneth Walker was still 50-50 at that point.
Right.
And I really like the matchup here. And like you said, the Seattle offensive line was a huge issue. I mean, Howell and Geno were sacked 7 times by 6 different Packers. They had 12 quarterback hits on the night. This felt like the official coming out party, especially if you were watching the game with sound last night. We heard a lot about it for Edgerrin Cooper, who registered a 93.8 PFF grade, highest grade for any Packers defender in the last 2 seasons. He had the pick to seal it at the end. Just a really, really good draft pick. One of many young, great players on this Packers roster.
Right.
2nd rounder out of Texas A&M. He was the 2nd linebacker off the board though, in this past draft. So it was not viewed as a great linebacker draft. And you look at a 2nd rounder, maybe your expectations are a little bit tempered, but I think when you consider he was basically the 2nd best player in the draft at his position, maybe it shouldn't be all that surprising that he's having the year that he is. Other than that, not a whole lot. I mean, another kind of frustrating day if you rolled Jaden Reed out there. He was targeted 6 times, but just 5 for 34. And we saw him on a few jet sweeps that added a little bit of value. Christian Watson continues to make really difficult catches every single week. It feels like he brings in every tough catch, but can't make the easy ones for some reason. And then Romeo Doubs, of course, 3 for 40 with the 2 touchdowns, including a really nice fingertip grab to put that final score on the board late in the 4th.
Yeah, and ran over a tackler on the first touchdown too. So pretty good.
Rocking the Guardian cap too.
Yeah, there you go. The NFC West remains like, okay, this week I think it's Team X that's going to win. This was a winning week for the Rams. Check this out. The 4 teams in the NFC West. The Rams have scored 310 points, given up 338. Seattle, 315, 313. Arizona, 314, 306. San Francisco, 314, 320. They're all they're the same team. They're all the same team. It's crazy. San Francisco's obviously got a lot of other stuff going on there, injury wise, drama wise. They just suspended Campbell there for the last 3 games of the regular season. They were able to find a way to make that happen. Because I think you're not usually allowed to do a 3-game suspension on that. But anyways, bizarro stuff there. But
good week for the Rams though, who are now back in the driver's seat in that division. They're 8-6. Seattle's 8-6, but the Rams, of course, have the head-to-head. So
and they play each other in week 18.
Yeah, they do. And the Rams play at the Jets, home for the Cardinals in week 16 and 17. So 2 should be pretty winnable games for the Rams. They are minus 150 to win the NFC West. Seattle plus 235. Arizona plus 550. San Francisco just off the board right now at DraftKings.
Wild. Vikings. The Seahawks get the Vikings at home next week. By the way, we should stop talking about Seattle as a fortress as of home field because they're losing a lot at home this year.
Oh, yeah.
At the Bears and then at the Rams to finish there. So as we alluded to. We're going to hit the other games, but we'll probably hit them in less detail because these were the big key games in terms of the NFL. But first, got a quick note from our friends at LIV Golf. A new season of LIV Golf Fantasy is coming in 2025. New prizes, new ways to win, and more are coming in the new season. Get ready to play and sign up now at fantasy.livegolf.com. Let's hit up the other games. We'll probably do like 2-minute flybys on all these games. Starting off with Cincinnati and Tennessee. This was a sloppy game, Nick.
Yeah, this is one of my official plays for the week was the Bengals to cover. I think I had it at 4.5 and was not a great start for Cincinnati. No. They throw a pick on the second play of the game. Joe Burrow loses a fumble later in the first quarter. Obviously they ended up turning it over on just a bizarre, should have been pick 6 that would have sealed up the cover in the second half. And Jordan Battle just dropped the ball before crossing the goal line. This was not. I don't really know what happened. I don't know if he was trying to switch hands. Like it was more of a bobble than it was like, oh, I'm trying to be cool and like drop the ball as I cross the goal line. Like
I feel like he was looking up and the leg hit his hand somehow or hit the ball and it just jostled. It was one of those. This is why you carry it high and tight. This is exactly why you just don't mess around. But that was wild. I mean, the Bengals got all their offensive production in the first half. Like the offense was rolling in the first half. And then Burrow had like 220 yards of passing in the first at halftime, ended up with 271. Like I used him in DFS. I used him and Chase in DFS. I'm like, yeah, let's keep going. This offense, even when they had those 2 turnovers, they were moving the ball. Like the fumble, by the way, was the first red zone possession in 40 plus possessions where they hadn't scored. They were like this red zone machine. And then that happened there. Wild game. But Will Levis was like comically bad. So bad in this game there that they yanked him in favor of Mason Rudolph. Rudolph's line looks okay. It looks good, actually. He wasn't that good. They had like a late scoring drive where the Bengals tacklers were just not trying on Tajay Spears one play. I don't know what the heck that was, but this was a farce of a game.
Yeah, Tennessee was awful. I mean, like you said, Will Levis, 8 of 12. 3 of his 4 incompletions were picks. One of them was a pick 6. Rudolph came in and, like you said, looks a lot better in terms of the raw stats. He was not. Levis also lost a sack fumble in this game. Like it was time to pull Will Levis. This was probably his worst game of the entire year. And Cincinnati only ran, 24 plays in the second half, and 14 of those came on their final, clock killing drive. And I believe if I'm seeing this correctly, like Chase Brown handled the final 10 plays of that drive were all Chase Brown runs. There were a couple passes in there that were called back because of penalties, but the official play count was 10 in a row for Chase Brown to finish it off. And the touchdown to make this a 37-21 game actually ended up mattering as far as the cover goes, because Tennessee, I think for the second or third time this season scored on the final play of the game, just to put a little lipstick on the pig. And like you said, Cincinnati completely given up defensively at that point. But to tie this back into what you said, it was sloppy. Yeah, good win, I guess, for Cincinnati. You saw a shot of Joe Burrow late in the game when you knew Cincinnati was going to win. He looked frustrated. He's talking with Zach Taylor, just saying this. I think he said this expletive is embarrassing. And you don't necessarily love to see that from your quarterback sitting on the bench in what's going to be a win.
I don't I liked it.
Yeah, I don't think Cincinnati comes out of this game like feeling any better about themselves.
Yeah. 26 combined penalties for a combined 223 yards in this game. The refs came to play. I will say that. There's some legit ones in there. There were 2 super sketchy PIs in this one for each team. It was just ugly all around. All right. Enough said about that one. If the Bengals still need a lot of things to happen before they're really relevant in the playoff chase. Baltimore thumps the Giants like everybody thought they would. I was like, 15.5 is so much. This is clear. Like 2 minutes into the game, I'm like, I've made a huge mistake.
Yeah. Well, we ended up seeing Tim Boyle for the Giants. So anytime that happens, you're not gonna feel great about your chances. We also had another plane with a banner flying over the stadium, second week in a row. This time it read, "Mr. Mara, enough. We won't stop until you fire everyone." So it looks like this may continue for the rest of the season at Giants home games. The Ravens started this game with a big kickoff return from Justice Hill, which he almost took the distance. And then Lamar Jackson loses the fumble on the first drive, and you're thinking, okay, is this going to be like, Philly and Carolina last week, where you're asking a great team to cover a big number and they get off to a sluggish start? Yeah. Even the second drive of the game, the Baltimore had a 4th and 1 at midfield. They check it out, they punt the ball. And, as somebody who was on Baltimore, I wasn't feeling great about it. But then Lamar hit the gas. He finds Mark Andrews in the end zone for a touchdown, who, by the way, set the Ravens franchise record for total touchdowns with 48. Mark Andrews did, breaking Jamal Lewis's career record. The Giants, like kind of their last gasp to make this a game, I felt like in the first half, they went for a 4th and 1 at about the Baltimore 35, got completely stuffed, completely eaten up. That led to the Rashad Bateman touchdown, 1 of 2 for him on the day. In the first half, Lamar Jackson had 55 rushing yards. He was 13 of 14 passing for 162 yards and 3 touchdowns. His rushing yards prop on the day was 46.5. So he cleared that easily in 2 quarters. But not a whole lot to say here. I mean, this was just kind of the beatdown that you would expect for Baltimore. For Lamar, it was his 5th career game with 5 touchdown passes and 5 or fewer incompletions. No other player in NFL history has more than 3 of those games. And then the last thing I'll say is that the Giants actually did a pretty reasonable job on Derrick Henry. Much like Saquon last week, you're just thinking, oh man, this is such a good matchup.
Right.
Minimum 120 yards and 2 touchdowns for Derrick Henry. Not the case.
No. And in fact, a lot of people probably didn't start Rashad Bateman. So it was basically Lamar eats and nobody else does. Even Andrews, he got the touchdown, but it's 2 for 24 otherwise.
Yeah. It's like Tez Walker caught a touchdown. Justice Hill caught a touchdown.
Who is this Deontay Johnson? Why do we care? They don't. Justice Hill with the receiving touchdown. Like, okay. Yeah. Not even Zay Flowers couldn't really eat, 6 for 53. I mean, he got you a baseline number. That's about it. Neighbors is the only guy in the Giants that did anything, 10 for 82 in the touchdown. They tried to get him a second time. Remember, they went out on downs late where they targeted him, almost got the one, but then like it was in his hands and the defender knocked it out as he was going down. And it was a good play, but that was pretty much it. Like you said, not a whole lot else to talk about in this game.
No, fourth game this season, by the way, for Neighbors with at least 10 catches, which is pretty wild. I think if you're redoing the receivers in the 2024 draft, it feels like it's Neighbors versus Brian Thomas for that top spot.
Yep. When we talk about Marvin Harrison, we'll talk about how he's just not getting open. But Jets-Jaguars, talk about Brian Thomas Jr. Huge game, 10 for 105, 2 touchdowns. Jaguars had the lead. They even got it back after giving it up. And then, I was on the Jaguars to cover, and I knew the second they did the game time field goal, I'm like, okay, this is only going to end one way. It's going to be a touchdown. And, they're not going to settle for the field goal. They're going to score the touchdown. Of course they did. But man, pity the fool that was going up against Devontae Adams this week.
Well, I mean, for most of the game, it didn't feel like Devontae was all that good. He had a couple drops early on, just wasn't that involved. And he had 135 receiving yards in the final 4 minutes of this game, including the long touchdown that ended up being the game winner for the Jets. Jets, of course, finished off the game with their second interception of Mac Jones. I don't know where he was throwing that ball. Just one of the easiest interceptions you'll see. For Sauce Gardner, it was his first pick since 2022. I actually thought on balance, Sauce Gardner was kind of a liability in this game. Had a huge penalty in the end zone that set up the opening touchdown to Brian Thomas for the Jags. It was just a very Jets-Jags game in just about every way. It was higher scoring than I expected, 32-25. And, Aaron Rodgers was like under 150 yards passing for, into the fourth quarter. And then, of course, connected with Devontae on the 2 long ones, ended up with almost his second consecutive 300-yard game, ended at 289. I actually thought Mac Jones, other than the 2 picks, which you just pencil in every week, he's going to throw picks. Other than that, he was actually pretty good. Like, he was getting loose on the ground. He had some swagger to him. He's getting in people's faces. He's celebrating. I actually thought he was pretty solid. But as he tends to do every week, heavy targets for the tight ends. So the Jaguars did not have Evan Ingram. He's out for the year. So Brenton Strange came through 12 targets, 11 catches for 73 yards.
Yeah.
I think that's going to be, maybe not to this level. He's not going to have 12 targets every week. But again, Mac Jones loves throwing to tight ends. I think if you're in a pinch, if you're in a 2 tight end league, I would go grab Brenton Strange. They play the Raiders, the Titans, and the Colts the rest of the way. So some pretty solid matchups there.
Yeah. I mean, you're death by like 5-yard paper cuts, but still it works.
Yeah.
I used Strange in DFS because he was min priced. And yeah, so that was useful. Other things were not useful in that one, but in my contest, but nonetheless, that part was pretty wild. I think that's all we got to say about that. Let's move on to Cowboys-Panthers. This was the anti-vibes game. There couldn't have been more positive vibes about the Panthers going in. There couldn't have been more negative vibes about the Cowboys going in. So of course, this was a stomp. The Cowboys were the better team the whole way through the game.
Absolutely. And this game, probably should have been over at the half. The Cowboys had a very good chance to make this 17-0, and Cooper Rush just dropped the ball on an RPO deep in Carolina territory. Panthers recover. So it went from, should have been 17-0 before the half to all of a sudden it's 10-7 because on the very next play, Bryce Young on a broken coverage just finds Jalen Coker wide open down the field for an 83-yard touchdown. So it looked like all the mistakes, the interception by Bryce Young early on, he ended up having a rough game. But Carolina couldn't get anything in the first half. And for a moment, it looked like all that was going to be erased by this 83-yard touchdown. All of a sudden, you're back in the game. But Dallas came out, ended up scoring on their first possession out of the half and kind of reestablished dominance. Worth noting, by the way, that Dallas did try a 70-yard field goal before the half. Not even close. I admire them trying it because they almost did it early in the season, and they chickened out. They tried it outdoors in Carolina, and Aubrey, you could tell he just put everything into it and hooked it way left. Ended up being returned to like the 40-yard line before half, but it's ended up being too many turnovers, I think, to overcome for Carolina. And you look at how the Panthers have hung in these games over the last few weeks. Obviously, it's been improved play from Bryce Young. They've had a lot of timely, third, fourth downs that have kept them in games, but really they've been a high volume running team. I mean, Chuba Hubbard, is carrying the ball 17, 18, 20 plus times most weeks. And because they were trailing, they just had to get away from that. And it turned into Bryce Young, obvious passing situations. He loses 2 sack fumbles. He throws 2 picks. I still, I don't think this is like, it's all coming crashing back down for Bryce Young, but he was put in a tough spot playing from behind.
Absolutely. 6 sacks, like you said. Micah Parsons just was a force in this game. And it's like I think they kind of rallied behind like their injured teammates and all that, and they're like, okay, well, let's have a little bit of pride here. We're not going to make the playoffs necessarily, but have a little bit of pride. We can't be underdogs to the Carolina Panthers, for crying out loud. It's almost felt like that was the reaction.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Well, I just have a couple more notes here. For one, I think we kind of forget that this is still an opportunistic Dallas defense. Might not be a good defense, but when they have all their defensive backs, like, it's a totally different unit. And, you shouldn't be surprised that they've been able to generate turnovers these last 2 weeks. I thought this would be a much better day for Chuba Hubbard, who played almost every snap, 52 of 55 snaps, but again, only carried 10 times. Panthers put up 3.8 yards per play in the first half. Very bad. And then the last thing I'll say, Rico Dowdle, he went his first 46 games in the NFL without a 100-yard game. He now has 3 consecutive 100-yard games, 6 yards per carry on that Carolina defense, 25 for 149.
Yeah. That I gave that one out on VSiN. That was the one thing I was like, I had 2 different VSiN appearances. First one went better than the second one. We're going to forget about the second one. I gave out like David Montgomery and Devon Vele or something like that. But Rico Dowdle, I gave out the Cowboys. I was kind of on that game, so I felt good about that at least. We are on the Blue Wire Network. Here are their ads. The Washington Commanders held on for dear life to beat the New Orleans Saints. Their commitment to the non-cover, missing the field goal, up 7. That was a nice touch. And then the Saints said, well, let's go ahead and try to win now that we kind of locked in the cover at 7.5 as well. This is a game that I didn't follow super closely. I'm going to have to do the rewatch on. I'm not looking forward to it, though, because it seems like the Commanders just grounded themselves. They had this nice little lead. Yeah. They're cruising. Jaden Daniels got sacked 8 times in this game. Just some weird things happening in this game.
Yeah, Washington, looked like they were going to run away with this game at times, especially in the first half. I mean, it was 14-0 midway through the second quarter. They forced 2 more Saints punts and had a couple of opportunities to tack on points before the half. Couldn't quite do it. It felt in some ways a lot like Saints Giants last week, where the Saints are in control. You're watching other games, you're not really paying attention, and all of a sudden you're like, what is going on here? Like the Saints are driving with a chance to not only tie the game but attempt to take the lead. Obviously, there was some interesting clock snafus, we'll say, late in the game, where Saints are without a timeout. They have a play that comes up short of the goal line. The clock very clearly stopped for about 3 or 4 seconds, and they end up clocking it, I think, with 3 seconds on the clock to get that final play where they scored to Foster Moreau. Thankfully, the Washington Commanders were able to get the stop on the 2-point conversion. But this is one, Jeff, that I pulled from my official card. I loved Washington. I loved them at 6.5 early in the week, and then all of a sudden it's 7 and it's 7.5, and I'm like, I still think Washington wins comfortably, but I can't put this one on the card. And I spent most of the first half regretting that, thinking that Washington's just going to run away.
Right.
And they never did. Like you said, they just never did. They had a lot of promising drives, where they would get to midfield, they'd get to like the Saints 40-yard line, and then there would be one of those sacks, and all of a sudden it's 3rd and 18, and they end up punting. The field goal decision late in the game was interesting. You're on your third kicker, right? It's Greg Joseph. It's not Austin Seibert. It's not whoever else has been kicking for them.
Gonzalez.
Yeah, 54-yarder. I know you're in the dome. I know that would make it a 2-score game. You don't love the idea of punting from your opponent's 36-yard line, but I think at that point you got to make Spencer Rattler try to go the length of the field with limited timeouts. So I think if Washington could do that over again, they would probably make that decision. And of course, we should mention that Jake Haener started this game, went 4 of 10 for 49 yards, threw a terrible interception. Then they turned to Rattler for the second half. He wasn't a whole lot better, but he feels a lot more dangerous. There's that kind of berserkerness to him that you don't really feel like is there with Haener.
Right. And, anything, because like Haener, check down machine, 3 sacks, all of it was bad there. Do you think there's some teams find a way to make kickers miss? Because since Rizzi has become the interim head coach, the Saints have this wild record, kickers missing kicks against them. It's incredible. Of course, a couple blocks in there against the Graham Gannott last week on the 35-yarder and all that. But is that possible even?
Maybe there's some scheming to be done there as far as what you could do to get through and getting ahead of a kicker. I don't know. I mean, I'm just inclined to believe when it's a 3rd-string kicker trying a 54-yarder, you're just going to be in trouble there.
Yeah.
Worth noting also, by the way, so we mentioned when Jake Haener was out there, the Saints had 38 yards of offense in the first half, 1.9 yards per play. They scored a touchdown to Alvin Kamara, crazy one-handed catch. I actually didn't think he was in bounds, but this was a quick review, and they're like, yep, he was in, whatever. That was a pass from Cedric Wilson, who was credited for that touchdown, not Jake Haener. But Alvin Kamara went to the medical tent. Too. It was a beautiful throw. Alvin Kamara went to the medical tent shortly after that and is dealing with a groin injury. So that'll be more so for fantasy than real life. I mean, the Saints are 5-9, their season's over. But they are big underdogs going to Green Bay this week. The number was 13.5 this morning. And I think there's a real possibility that Alvin Kamara won't be out there.
There's a very real possibility that I got the bye in the RotoWire Dynasty League playoffs, and I'm not going to have a starting running back. My 2 running backs are Kamara and Montgomery.
Uh-oh. Well, Montgomery's for sure not going to be out there.
Yeah. I tried to trade for one, couldn't pull it off. That's going to come back to haunt me. I could have traded, but the only one the only one I was even offered was Kareem Hunt. And I knew that was when Pacheco was coming back. So I'm just double checking right now that to make sure that is my team. Yep. Montgomery, Kamara, gonna be interesting.
There we go.
Yeah. Well, let's see what luminaries I'll have. And it's thin. It's really thin. Like all my, like Devin, I will be starting Devin Singletary. I'll tell you that much right now. I don't even know who my other running back's going to be. It's going to be Mr. Waiver Wire, I think. So going to be ugly. We'll see what happens there. But Kamara, Kendra Miller might be a live play. We see this all the time. We saw it with Charbonnet. We saw it with other running backs that get picked up. We see it every year. It's opportunities arise, and you just got to take advantage of it there. Let's move on. We got the Texans and the Dolphins. This was, this is an impactful game for playoff purposes. The Dolphins, this kind of ends them. Well, it doesn't end them, but it puts them in a pretty disadvantageous spot. Mm-hmm. Yet again, though, the Texans win, and I feel still a little underwhelmed by what they did.
Yeah, well, first of all, Mike McDaniel is now 1-12 straight up in road or neutral games when he's facing a team above 500. So this has been a pattern over the last few years for Miami. And yeah, I don't feel any better about Houston necessarily. I mean, Miami did not play well. Really brutal game for Tua with 4 turnovers. But Miami held Houston to 181 total yards.
Another sub 200 winner. Yeah.
Yeah, and you just, if you're Miami, you feel great about that coming in, right? If they told you that, hey, Houston's going to put up 20 points, they're going to have 181 total yards, and you're going to lose this game by 8 points. I mean, Miami had 4, 5, 6 chances throughout the game to kind of go out there and take advantage, and just kept failing to capitalize. It actually reminded me a lot of that Houston Buffalo game earlier in the year, which was one of the weirdest games of the season.
Yes, it was.
Even looking back, like, how did Houston win that game? Where, it felt like Buffalo was the better team throughout, and they just, every time they would, make some sort of progress, there'd be a turnover, there'd be a killer penalty. And that's really what kept happening to the Miami Dolphins. Yet again, Jeff, believe it or not, the Dolphins could not run the ball. It was another classic, like 14 for 41 day for Devon Achane. And I think it's really difficult to operate an offense when the other team knows that you can't run. You basically have to get away from it as the game goes along. There were no big plays yet again for Miami. The Dolphins ended up losing Jalen Waddle late in the first half. He didn't come back in. That certainly didn't help. Hill and Waddle had 0 catches well into the second half. Hill's first catch came at the 7-minute mark in the third quarter. It's emblematic of, I think, a lot of the issues that have been there all year for Miami. And recently they've been able to escape some of these games despite that. But this Houston team, I mean, you got to give them credit. I mean, 2 big-time interceptions, clutch interceptions by Derek Stingley really ended up putting this game away.
Absolutely. Jonnu Smith with a late score, second week in a row where he's kind of sitting on a near nothings game, and then it ends up with a pretty decent fantasy day. 9 catches, all short catches this game.
Of course.
Again, there were just no big plays on that side of the ball. Actually, on the Houston side too, for that matter, offensively, Joe Mixon got banged up, and he was ineffective when he was out there. 12 for 23, 5 he was their leading receiver at 5 catches for 33 yards. Leading both in catches and yards. 33 yards is their leading receiver. CJ Stroud did not get fixed over the bye. This offensive line did not get fixed over the bye. And yet it's a win and it's a cover.
Yeah, both teams were bad in this game, especially Houston offensively. They had 1 play on the day that went for more than 15 yards, and that was a Dare Ogunbowale run for 35 yards.
Never see it coming. You never see Dare coming.
Miami had 2 plays that went for more than 15 yards. One was a Malik Washington catch and run. The other one was Tyreek Hill. And, again, every week that's the case for Miami. They could get those like 12 to 17 yard plays, but they're never hitting the 45 yarder. Right. Yeah. And that's what you think of when you think of Tyreek Hill specifically and Jalen Waddle and the Dolphins. And they don't have the ability to quick strike anymore. You mentioned the Jonnu Smith touchdown, by the way, which that was a huge play because Houston was up 20-6 at that point. The Dolphins were kicking a field goal to conceivably make it 20-9, but Houston lined up offside. So the Dolphins then took the yardage and went for it on 4th and 2, and Tua hit that touchdown to Jonnu Smith.
Yeah. That was the one positive big play they had. The Grant Dubose injury was horrible in this game too. It's still getting they're monitoring his status. It seems like he's stable at least, but it was a pretty ugly injury there too. Last game to talk about here, New England, Arizona, and it really was kind of a nothing sort of game, unfortunately. I treated myself to the rewatch on this one after the Sunday night game, just to get it done and over with there, because the Pats, they just have no downfield game at all. Nothing. It's all checkdowns and screens and running plays. Because their offensive line is the worst offensive line I've ever seen. They had a sequence. I mean, it was only 2 sacks on May this week, but it felt like he was under siege a lot. There was a back-to-back sequence where they had a running play that just got stuffed. Like the lineman the left tackle didn't block anybody. Subsequent play, left tackle got beat right away and May got swallowed up. I mean, that was emblematic of what the Pats experience is like offensively.
Yeah, this was a pretty depressing effort for New England. I'm glad we saved this one for last. I don't have many notes here. Patriots started the game with a missed field goal. Feels like you could chalk up 1 or 2 of those every single week. Just a kind of a momentum killer right off the bat. They did tack on a couple of touchdowns on their final 2 possessions to make this look a little bit better than it was, but overall, not a great offensive day. I mean, I certainly don't fault Drake May. He was efficient, 19 of 23 for 202. The interception came on a tip ball that probably should have been caught. Really wasn't his fault.
Oh, no.
The touchdown was a very nice, almost Mahomesian type of play from Drake May, where he's rolling left and ends up kind of flicking it in the end zone to Demario Douglas. But like we say every week with the Patriots, like even when Drake May is piling up yardage, who do you start? Who do you feel comfortable rolling out in a meaningful fantasy lineup, right? Like the distribution always ends up being so equal. I mean, Kendrick Bourne, Austin Hooper, Antonio Gibson, Hunter Henry, Keyshawn Butte, Marcus Jones, the cornerback, ended up having a catch in this game. Ramondre, Douglas, Polk, like all these guys are involved, but nobody ends up being the target hog. And, for a while there, Hunter Henry early in the year, it's like, yeah, maybe as a lower end tight end, you could see it, but the target volume hasn't really been there for him either. The Patriots also only ran 49 plays. So it's going to be hard for any pass catcher specifically to do much when you're only throwing the ball 23 times. Fantasy wise, on the Arizona side, James Conner ended up having a really nice day. 5 catches for 28 yards in addition to the 110 and 2 touchdowns on the ground. The Cardinals tried. Like they made an effort to get Trey McBride a touchdown. They tried the Chiefs shovel pass on the goal line. He ended up like an inch short. So he instead ended up extending his NFL record for catches without a touchdown, 9 for 87 for him on 10 targets.
Yeah. Still good day. You're still happy to have him on your team. I still rank him as a top 3 tight end every week, but yeah, it is really frustrating. Marvin Harrison can't get separation. Marvin Harrison Jr. could not, at least against Christian Gonzalez, he could not. There was a couple of plays where he was sliver open and Murray actually threw a good ball and Gonzalez found a way to break it up in the corner of the end zone, but he's just not open, and that's you see Neighbors, you see Brian Thomas Jr. and they're creating that separation, whether it's the route running or the speed. I'm not sure which is the culprit here. I need to probably have someone who's better at watching film tell me this, but it's just not there.
Yeah, I'm looking right now. This is accounting for some guys who've missed a lot of time, but essentially in terms of average PPR production, he's like the wide receiver 40 on the year. So He's been comparable value to someone like Keenan Allen, Calvin Ridley, Quentin Johnston, Rashad Bateman, Xavier Worthy. This is a guy who was going at the end of the first round in a lot of drafts. Yep. And, there have been a couple splash weeks. I think was it week 2 where he had the big game, like 30 fantasy points. He had a big game in week 8, but other than that, I mean, like the ceiling right now for Marvin Harrison, like you're happy if he gives you like 15 PPR points. I mean, it's concerning, man. It's concerning because I don't know if it's just a bad fit with the style of play from Kyler Murray, because I don't think Marvin Harrison, like I don't think it was just a total whiff on the evaluation, and you see enough positives that I don't think it's not like a Kadarius Toney situation, right? Jalen Reagor, where you're just like, oh my goodness, we've made a massive mistake. Like there's enough there that I don't think we're just totally punting on Marvin Harrison, but the Cardinals like desperately need a weapon. I think that's what's so frustrating is like there should be opportunity here. Like, they have Trey McBride, that's great, but Marvin Harrison should be way at the top, in terms of the target share among these receivers. And it's like he was outproduced by Greg Dortch this week against New England. It's like this should be a good matchup, and yeah, it feels like this happens week after week. So I think he's going to be a really interesting evaluation going into next year.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it could be year 2. It's traditionally it used to be we wait for the year 2, year 3 jump anymore for wide receivers. Now we expect it right away. But I do think there is definitely there's still a developmental curve there that we don't give credit. And same with quarterbacks. I think we expect too much right away. But yeah, and that's why, like when we were in Vegas on Radio Row at Circa having dinner that first night, Alan Seslowski would say, "This is bonkers. No wide receiver goes this early ever." Alan gets validation, Holmes. He is right. He was right.
He does. Well, I think the other part of this too is it makes it doubly difficult if you're a Cardinals fan or a Marvin Harrison fantasy owner to see Brian Thomas doing what he's doing, to see Malik Neighbors doing what he's doing in like indisputably worse situations, right? Yep. I mean, I guess you could argue that these guys are being peppered with targets, but Malik Neighbors had Tim Boyle throwing him the ball in the second half. Brian Thomas has dealt with Mac Jones for half the year, and a Trevor Lawrence who wasn't even that good. It's not like these other guys are vastly outperforming them because they're in these great situations. And I think that's what's really concerning when you start to spin it toward next year. It's like, who's taking Marvin Harrison over Malik Neighbors or Brian Thomas in a 2025 draft? I don't think anybody is.
And it's not like Harrison's up against an alpha wide receiver on the other side either.
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
I don't know. Frustrating.
Very much so. All right, we'll end on that note of frustration. Week 1 of the playoffs. Still got 2 games tonight, so a lot of things can change in their fantasy playoffs still. But hopefully you're doing well and you're advancing to their next round. Thank you for spending some time with us today, and we'll be back catch us on SiriusXM Fantasy Monday through Thursday. Nick and I are on from 5 to 7 p.m. West Coast time. That's 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. Or got the breadbasket of the country, 7 to 9 as well there in Central Time. All right, I'm babbling about time zones. It's time to end this podcast. Thanks everybody for listening. Have a great day.